Welcome to the Better Business, Better Life podcast with Stuart Wilkinson and
Dave Jags.
welcome Dave from cold Christchurch.
Yeah, it snowed again in October.
Is it because you've moved to Christchurch that it's decided to get really, really cold since you moved there?
Yeah, it's quite interesting. I'm probably still in the novel stage where people are like, oh no, I'm like, this is cool. Florence wants to get outside, more snow on the mountains. This is all going, but there's definitely other people in the office who are like, no, Dave, shut up. We want summer now.
We want summer. Let's bring on summer.
Yeah. Let's move on.
Yeah. We kind of, you get to October, you think, oh, yeah, it's time for after a very wet winter. But anyway, Dave, today's episode, to the listeners, we decided to do a bit of update of what's been in the news. We haven't done one of these in a while, and it comes off the back of the Reserve Bank announcing an increase in the official cash rate, which we'll go into. But we also want to kind of talk a little bit around some of the government's proposed legislation, fair pay agreements, and also the income insurance scheme, which has been touted. Not passed into legislation yet, but all has direct relations on businesses and business owners and things just to be aware of that might be coming. So we'll talk about that. We might also get onto Xero released their Xero Business Insights, which is kind of a snapshot of the trends they're seeing across all Xero users, which is a really good sample set. Like we have 300 or 1,000 businesses use Xero, so it's a really good indicator. And there's some interesting stuff in there as well. And linking that with Dave's had some conversation with some banks recently as well, with business bankers, and so kind of marrying that up of what they're seeing of what's coming up. And we're going to try and keep this short and snappy, aren't we, Dave? Today.
Yeah, we'll do our best. But I think also, it's one of those ones, isn't it? It can sound very doom and gloom, but the honest truth is information is power, isn't it? And knowledge is power.
Correct.
So actually understanding this stuff rather than burying your head will give you the opportunity to either be in front of it, or it will give you the opportunity to leverage it for your benefit, which is always the key thing, I think, isn't it?
Correct. So the first section, official cash rate. So we're recording this on Thursday, the 6th of October. So yesterday, the 5th of October, we got Adrian Orr announced another significant increase in the official cash rate, 50 basis points or 0.5. And so we're now sitting at 3.5% for the official cash rate. And this, I guess, is still to counter inflation, which is still for the June quarter, which is last reported quarter of inflation, I think, was 7.3%. So, I think all of us in our daily lives, whether it's in business or personally, are experiencing obviously increases in prices. I think it's interesting now that the petrol one has actually come down, and we're still experiencing price increase. Everyone was blaming petrol for a long time, and anyway, that's another story. But obviously, this has ripple effects into the cost of lending, the cost of your mortgage potentially, and just how much more. Now, the thing that Adrian Orr was kind of clear of is this probably won't be the last of these increases. Like it's that they were contemplating going harder at 0.75. They decided not to. So it is obviously we're in an environment where they're still wanting to get inflation under control and have concerns. That's also balance, and I'm not going to get into too much of this because I don't understand it fully, but the fact that the New Zealand dollar is a little bit down and weak at the moment, and that obviously has flow-on effects for importing and exporting costs at the moment. So there's also concerns around that. So in summary, Dave, thoughts?
I guess I think we all knew that we were going to be at these high interest rates by now, but I think we all probably hoped that we're going to be starting to break the back of it. And unfortunately, that's not quite the case. However, if you kind of saw it coming and you did take it on board, you should be in a reasonably good position. So if you haven't taken it on board and you haven't got things kind of sorted out, potentially reducing debt levels or locking debt levels in, like you do need to do it. Like it's not going to get better than today.
Yeah.
That's
gone a year ago where we were like, oh, it will get cheaper, so I'll hang on.
Hopefully, it looks like the housing market is starting to kind of turn and things like that, which will kind of start to kick back in, which is good. However, it's not changing the fact that effectively people are still spending a lot of money that they don't.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. You link it to the Xero insights that we saw, that they're still seeing strong sales growth across small business, which is interesting. They're seeing is in wages, they're seeing increases in number of jobs. So, there's still people investing, but I guess in some ways that's where, if you see increasing wages, that some of that is inflationary activity, because we've got I don't know how many clients you speak to, Dave, on a daily basis, and the one thing they all talk about is skill shortages and not having the right people and not enough people. Like, it's still a problem. It's a massive problem for a lot of people. I was catching up with someone yesterday, and they are involved very much in the sales industry and work a lot in the B2B sales industry and have contacts with a lot of different companies in there. And they said getting salespeople now is borderline impossible, good salespeople. And they were saying that you're seeing people that are on sort of 80 grand getting offered 120 sort of stuff. And so the skills are hard, and then so you're countering that. So, but I think, as you said, Dave, I guess it's the decisions you now have to kind of make on whether it's you have overdraft facilities going into a slower time of the year, potentially with Christmas, that might be a little bit more expensive, planning for that, or investments you're going to make and still going ahead, but being really clear on what my rate's going to be and planning for that. But it's just being a bit more thoughtful, and, as you said, Dave, planning, really.
Yeah, I feel like, we are having a bit of a perfect storm when it comes to, particularly for New Zealand, compared to a lot of other countries around the world. Like, we did delay opening our borders from a COVID point of view. So we opened into winter, which was quite calculated to, obviously reduce the influx of visitors. However, it's meant that when we've got that very migrant population, we're not going to get an influx of people till we start hitting the summer months, and they're going to be the people who are going to backfill through those kind of, front of house, hospo staff, retail staff, all of those kind of things. So those guys are still struggling, and that kind of has a ripple effect up the ladder, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Across the ladder, up the ladder, sideways, downways. Do you know what I mean? We need some more of that working force coming into the country, and hopefully we're only a couple of months away from that. And then you double that down with a lot of people are kind of coming out of those cash flow loans now, coming out of those terms, so they're kind of starting to get hit with repayments and interest rates. That it's all setting itself up nicely. Actually, now's a good time to make sure that you're being extremely smart. Like, one of the biggest things I've been particularly working with my clients is, are all of your assets actually returning? Because if they're not, now is the time to look at moving them. Or don't buy them unless it's actually going to give you a direct return reasonably quickly. Because you don't want to be carrying those debts. It's not worth it right now. You're just paying too much on the dollar for it.
I think it's really good advice, Dave. And I think, what probably people more, I guess, the sense is, are people wary of this? Yeah, they are, but I think they're more concerned around how can I fulfill my capacity as a business with just not having the people, I guess, is what I got a sense of. There's just a bit of a worry about that. My top tip, and Dave will probably echo this, is, and we've talked about this in another podcast, and it might seem a little bit out there, but targeting skilled people from overseas, particularly the UK at the moment, there'll be a lot of people in the UK at the moment, bearing on the absolute cluster that place is at the moment, that will be seriously looking at other options. So we laugh, but I reckon there'll be a bunch of people that 6 months ago.
I think we're allowed to. Leaving. 2 Englishmen living in New Zealand, we can laugh about it.
But I guess there is other parts of the world where there's more going on, and where cost of living is going up significantly, pressures on businesses are going up significantly. So there'll be people starting to question a few things. So whether you're in the construction sector looking for plumbers, chippies, whatever it might be, there'll be a bunch of people from the UK who go, maybe it's time to look at something different.
It's time to consider something. Yeah,
correct.
That would definitely help ease those employment shortages. And it's not as hard as you think, is the one thing I would say to all of you, is speak to immigration and have a chat with them, because actually they're there to help. From my point of view, doing it in the past, it has helped.
And you can get probably. And also, you're not competing purely then on wage. They're coming for family. They're coming for lifestyle. They're coming for, sanity in a government. Sorry, that's my little rant about what the Conservatives do into the country. It's different things and an opportunity, and you probably can get some really skilled people, different skill sets potentially. You might be tapping into then in your local market experience that you're looking for, at a reasonable rate, who can hit the ground running and add real value to your business. So just think about it, I think.
And they're liable to be sticky, because they'll have to be effectively signed to you for at least 2 years as part of their contract setup. Yeah.
Correct.
So like just quickly going back to kind of assets and kind of interest rates on loaning and things like that, we've kind of spoken about that negative side of it from a point of view of now's a good time to be paying down debt. And this is something that everybody needs to actually consider, because it's got to sit in line with your target market and whether they're still buying. So if they're potentially outside of that squeeze middle, but if you're in a good spot, now is a good time to also take those opportunities and step up on your competition, which is something that I've also been speaking with businesses about. Like, if you're in a good spot, maybe it's the time to take on that extra asset so that you can deliver a new service. So either increase the cost of sale per customer, or increase the frequency, or increase the speed that you're doing things at, so that you can actually leverage it. So, controlled risk is good, but you just got to understand where things are going in the future. And if you are getting squeezed, it's definitely the time to try and reduce things. But you've got to understand your numbers, which we talk about all over the podcasts. But, just factoring it in and, setting up.
I think that's a really good point, Dave, because I think there's maybe some businesses that start to struggle a little bit, whether it's they've got too much debt and it's starting to get too pricey, whatever it might be. But, you may be in a situation where you've got a great team, you've got your business model really cranking, your margins are still good, or you're comfortable where they're at, and you're like, well, I've got a great ability, I'm not carrying any debt, so I've got a great ability to push forward and expand. And I think you're right, Dave. I think it's very easy to maybe go a bit insular now, whereas for some businesses, that's the opportunity to take that next step and seize more market share, or diversify in something that, like I've got a client at the moment, and they've been very consumer focused, like retail focused, but have had a little bit of wholesale on the side, but now they're seeing that's the way they want to go and can really take their business at levels, so they're really working out their strategy on doing that. So, it's not the time to be shy. I think if you've got great product, great service, you can leverage that.
Well, it's all about controlled risk, isn't it? And I hate to say it, but like in these kind of times, the rich get richer, or the bold get richer, one of the two.
Yeah.
So I think you've just got to work out whether you can sit yourself in that camp for whichever it is.
Yeah, and so I think, look, there was a lot in there for section 1, but I think there's a lot of moving parts, whether it's your interest rates or whatever market conditions, but I think it's sitting down, and I know we're in a period of time now of the year where it's kind of a bit head down and just get through the Christmas. But if you know you've got renegotiating your finance maybe coming in the next 2 months, like start to sit down and think about it now. Okay, what's it potentially going up to? Can I fix early and get a better rate now, knowing that it might increase or the banks might increase in the next few months, whatever it might be? Talk to your banker about what do they need to see early, so you can start to get that prepared. Work with your accountant maybe some more, because the banks, from what you spoke to bankers yesterday, Dave, and I'm not as exposed to this, but the thing I get is they are asking a few more questions, shall we say, through the lending process. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it was quite interesting actually. I had a real good catch up with one of the senior partners at BNZ down here in Christchurch, and we were kind of just chatting about kind of common trends and things like that, and they're definitely getting pretty tight on lending now. There's a few things that they're particularly looking for, and that's just making sure that you're not over leveraged. They want to see that you've actually been setting yourself up over the past few years for this kind of situation. Did you see the first wave of COVID come through and then back up your kind of restore, get some money behind you before the second wave? Have you been paying down debt? Have you been sticking money aside? And the other real big interesting thing that I thought was quite prominent for him to actually say was the fact that actually now they're actually looking for businesses where they've got business advisors in place, and they're doing that because they know them. Yeah, they're looking at the support team around the business owners who are looking for this lending, because they know that they might be great at their service deliveries. We'll take Joe Bloggs who does roofing, but actually have they got the financial acumen to be doing what they're doing and take on this extra loan or whatever? And they're looking to see if they've got like that structure around them to kind of fill the knowledge holes, so that likely to dig a bit deeper, provide better terms if they feel secure.
Yeah, and I think without touting and selling ourselves here, but it doesn't mean when it's us or your current accountant or whoever. But I guess this is a time when at least once a quarter, just be sitting down with your accountant, talking through your numbers, where they're at, keeping an eye, a couple of important numbers if relevant for your business, but things like gross profit, your profit, revenue trends, all that kind of good stuff. but just make sure you've got good oversight. What's going on with cash, where the bottlenecks are potentially, how you can free that up. Just talking through any pain points you might be having. It's just being on it in some way, just knowing where you're at, what's important is important.
And I think it's really important, and this is something I've spoken to a couple of my clients about, but I also know Ethan is currently dealing with one as well. It's, believe it or not, when you go and speak to the bank, you are speaking to a human. So you actually need...
Good point.
Do you know what I mean? It's like, actually, you need to sell them the story. You need to explain where you're at, like why you're potentially looking for some lending, show them how you've set yourself up over the past 12 months. Actually explain, this is what it's going to do for my business in detail, because these guys aren't business owners. You're not talking to someone who knows everything about business. You know, they are professional bankers, so they're great at potentially writing credit and things like that, but they don't necessarily know like the nuances of owning a business and how this is directly going to impact you and your circumstances. So remember that you're not just sticking numbers on a page. You actually need to create the whole picture and the story for them.
Tell the story, why things have happened, what you're doing to mitigate any issues you've got in your business, but also talking about potential growth opportunities that you're trying to maximize and really, if you just go in there and go, here's my P&L, and they go, okay, like, cool, it's a set of numbers. Like, there's a story behind those numbers, I guess.
Yeah, and you actually need to present that to them. And I think that's really important to remember. It's not just a case of like, what's very clear in your head might not be very clear to them.
Correct. And I think it's when they go, okay, I can see in for the second quarter of the year, your margin dropped by 5%. If you go, oh, I don't know why, that's not the right answer. If you go, hey, this is what happened. I had to get some urgent stock from overseas, so I had to pay extra shipping costs, so that ate into my margin. So I took that hit to make sure I could supply. They're going to be like, cool, get it. Like, that's good. But if you don't, anyway. All right, we're short and snappy, Dave. We said short and snappy on our topics, and
we're at 18 minutes, and I think we've done.
We're 18 minutes. It's not too bad.
100% claiming that.
Yeah, it's good. So, the second two topics I've done a bit of research on, and we'll start with the income insurance scheme, which is Grant Robinson's little pet project, from what I can tell. In essence, what they are doing, and it's kind of similar to ACC as the model they're looking at. They want to put a safety net in for workers that if people get made redundant, or if it's for a health issue, so which is where it borders a little bit into ACC, there is a safety net of payments, 80% of your salary, which is capped depending on, if you're earning millions, it won't be that. But so you get that for, I think it's 6 months is what they're doing, 80% of your salary, 6 months. So similar to, you see this through like insurance companies offer this already, like redundancy insurance, all that kind of stuff. So how it would work is very similar to your ACC levies or income, is that, or KiwiSaver is probably the other one that's quite similar to, is the proposal is that the employee and the employer will both contribute 1.39% of all earnings from their employment to the income insurance scheme. And in return, employees will receive the following: a requirement to have 4 weeks notice of redundancy, which is normally the law, an additional 4 weeks pay at 80% from the employer. This is called the bridging payment. So there's a straightaway cost that would be extra. If you made someone redundant, you don't just have to give them 4 weeks notice, you then have to pay the following 4 weeks before the 6 months kick in at 80%. So if it's,
and they're not going to be in the business working at this time, they've gone.
No, they've.
So effectively you're paying out an extra 4 weeks holiday on top of whatever they've got.
Kind of
if you wanted to look at it like that.
And if they've got leave balances, that would be on top of this, remember, Dave? And then from that, up to 6 months pay on up to 80% of their normal earnings, subject to a cap. This can be extended. However, there's expectation that the individual's seeking employment, which is kind of then into, social security kind of stuff. Anyway, why are we talking about this? The key thing is that this would be a cost for business owners. So it doesn't matter if you've got 1 staff, 20 staff, 100 staff. This isn't like KiwiSaver where it's optional. If an individual doesn't want to go on KiwiSaver, cool, they don't have to go on KiwiSaver. Obviously it's becoming more and more opt out, which is a good thing for our futures. But this would be exactly like ACC in the sense that there's no room for negotiation. You have got an additional cost to the business. And whether that's ongoing or whether through the redundancy process. What they're trying to do is obviously put safety nets in place for employees. We can. It's interesting because obviously there's not been some great feedback, to be brutally honest, on about it, because obviously people have current insurance schemes themselves and they're like, well, what does that mean? I've been paying this for X amount of years, my own redundancy insurance, whatever. What's it mean for that? The second thing is, how does this then fly into social sort of security payments that you have through benefits and stuff, which are there already? So how does that work? But also thirdly, we're in a very tight labour market at the moment. So for most people, I get it's very daunting if you lose your job, but if you're a builder, for example, and you lose your job, you probably can get some building work pretty quickly. So, and it's in a time when costs are getting ramped up on businesses. So overall, it's still in legislation stage. There's no guarantee that it can go through, but they seem very committed to this. But there is a concern that this is very similar, to it concerns it's another cost of businesses, in short.
It is. It's really interesting, isn't it? It's an interesting time from that point of view of, all I can think of is is this the straw that breaks the camel's back? Or was it the last one? Or is it, do you know what I mean? There's just this constant barrage of like new things coming in, extra public holidays. So, yes, it's only 1.3% that you've got to contribute. It's probably not going to sink anyone. Yeah. However, it all adds up, doesn't it? Do you know what I mean? You add that
Correct.
on top of, you add that in with an extra day of like public holidays. And the bit that has always intrigued me, coming from being a business owner, is where do they think the money's going to come from? Because at the end of the day, it just changes the salaries that you offer.
Correct, which you started to see with KiwiSaver. Like KiwiSaver was part of the package rather than, and some employers got a bit fancy around that.
Let's kind of take it to something that I know, just kind of to make things a bit clearer here. So inflation has been rife this last 12 months, yeah?
Yep.
Physiotherapy is primarily supported a lot by ACC, so you obviously bill ACC. ACC did not go up anywhere near as much as inflation in their payments. Yeah, so how are we meant to... Not that it's me anymore. How are they meant to then roll that onto staff salaries? Because you only have so many billable hours a year. Yeah, so you have so many billable hours, which is maxed out. You then take an extra day away from those billable hours with more public holidays. ACC doesn't match inflation in the payments that you're receiving from them. So there's a finite amount of billable time. And now we've got to take another 1.3% out of it and contribute it into another pot.
Correct.
Plus safeguard this 4 weeks. It actually potentially just takes away from the disposable cash that the employees are going to have.
Yeah, and I think, look, the other part to this is, look, do you want to make sure that if people lose their jobs that they don't get into a bad situation? Of course, no one wants that in life. But let's be pretty frank about this. Some companies need to, whether it's a financial need, they need to make a redundancy of A, B, C, D, because part of their business is transitioning into, it's an old world business model or whatever. They actually transition into a new business model. I think it's all very well giving safety net, but part of this is kind of missing the point for me around the fact that, one, we should be incentivizing businesses to give additional training to move them into more skilled or future skilled work, for example, because we see it all the time. Our X person factory in somewhere is closing down because the Australians have moved it, or some global company. I get that is a catastrophic thing for a lot of the communities that we get, that are supported by that entity or whatever. But there's that scale, and there's Bob's ABC Consulting Limited's got 10 employees. He's lost his biggest client. I've got to make So he's got all this cost for May that he's got to do, that is funding this scheme, and it might support his employee. But what if you never make someone redundant? There's also a bunch of people that will never make people redundant because they've got sound staff, they've got good business model, and it's chalk and cheese, I think, when you've got small
and the business
businesses.
Owners are going to get hit for the first 4 weeks when they're most likely to potentially go out.
If they need to make decisions quick, they've got to fund it. Yeah.
Yeah, but then potentially they're going to kind of get hit for that first 4 weeks, which is likely when they're going to be out finding jobs. So it won't actually roll on to the funding pool potentially that quickly. And also the big question I'd love to know is, surely there's some industries that it's like, now we're not going to fund you because we know you can walk into work, you just need to be pushed. Yeah, like, so, like let's take accounting right now. Accountants are like short supply.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah?
You're not gonna. You might have
One of these
6 weeks, but
well, it probably wouldn't even be that realistically, would it? Like realistically,
if you want to get a job, you get a job.
If you wanted a job, you could go start one in next week. That's like
Pretty
the honest
quickly.
truth of it. It might not be where you want it to be. It might not be your ideal job, but you could get yourself a good paycheck. But are you going to do that if you know that you can sit at home on 80% and seek out the right job?
And this is what Grant Robinson said, and I think this is where it gets really frustrating, is we've also learned lessons from COVID-19. One of those is that just as it occurred after the Canterbury earthquakes and the GFC, like you're putting in 3 very different situations there. The government found itself having to put in place ad hoc measures to protect the income of New Zealanders who had lost their jobs. What did they do for the GFC? What, benefits?
I'm just going to say I don't know because...
And what did they do for cash? Anyway, sorry. We did this with the COVID income relief payments, obviously COVID. At the urging of Business New Zealand and the Council of Trade Unions, well, Business New Zealand have pulled out of this actually, we've committed to the development of a social unemployment scheme. I just think you're trying to, but then what's social welfare there for? Like at some point, if you're really struggling, there is means, and so are you trying to just get someone else to foot the bill through social welfare? Anyway, so we could rant for a while. As you can tell, we're probably not the fans of this. I just think it's terrible timing. Like what's going on in the economy, inflationary prices, price rises for businesses, wage prices already pressured there, just another cost, not good timing. So that's the first piece of great news for the podcast today. There is always silver linings.
Like the other way of framing, I guess, slightly is part of it is they're just encouraging you to have money set aside, isn't it? Keep money locked in the bank. How many, and that's something that, like, I spoke with yesterday when I was talking to the guys at BNZ. It's a case of one of the things they wanted to see between, say, the first lockdown and the second lockdown was, have you increased your bank balance to safeguard yourself? Because if you haven't,
or written off debt.
No, we're not going to help you out because you've been a moron. Yeah, you're living in a COVID world and you just kept spending money on stuff that you didn't necessarily need. And I think this is that similar thing, isn't it? They're basically saying, we need you. We got through COVID. We supported a lot of businesses, which no one can argue that they did.
No,
especially to start with. But we actually need you to start safeguarding yourselves a little bit better than you did last time.
Correct.
So there's an element there that I'm like, okay, that kind of makes sense. I just think it needs to be kind of fine-tuned a little bit because there is industries where it's like, no, go next door and ask for a job. You're going to get one.
Correct, and I think you've got businesses who may not do any form of redundancies for years and years, and you don't know what's happening around the corner, but they're funding the paper mill in wherever that closes down. Like I just don't.
And maybe the business should have to pay a month of staff salaries if the person makes it to 6 months of unemployment, or do you know what I mean? So it's kind of like, well, actually, I'll pay a month, but I pay 1 week per month.
Only if they get to the worst case.
Rather than actually you're going to get hit to start with when they're probably going to be off the entire time. Because, do you know what I mean? I think there's just better ways they can frame it where actually it keeps the pressure on people to go and find work, which is what needs to happen.
Correct. But I also think that, let's move on to the next gem. So I've had a little bit exposure. Yeah, I do a little bit exposure to this through some relationships we've got with some industry bodies, and it's been in the news. And this is our Michael Wood for Employment Relations, I think it's called, fair pay agreements. This has been going on and simmering for a while, and I think it's in select committee or they're taking feedback or whatever they call it. And this is sort of the industrial relations policy that the Labour have really been championing. Now, you're probably going on this podcast, I'm a business owner of 20 people or 15 people or 5 or 50, whatever it is. What's that? And I'm in construction. We don't really have we don't really have trade unions or whatever. And you'd be right to think that. However, the new legislation that is being proposed by the government will change that dramatically. In the show notes, I will link what is a really good 3-pager from PwC Legal, which kind of gives you a really good overview of it. So we'll go in the headline acts, but it's kind of got a bit of the detail in it. And with employment law and all this sort of stuff, there's some hefty detail with it. But in essence, what are they proposing? So what the government proposing, yet again, this is not legal yet, it's not passed into law, is that industrial relations will become a lot more easier to trigger, not at just a business level. So, hey, I'm an employee of the warehouse and I have problems with the warehouse, but industry wide. Now, in the commentary around this, they've done the old usual spin of, oh, we just want to support people who've propped up the economy through the pandemics, who've not been looked after, like bus drivers and cleaners and stuff, which, by the way, are already quite unionized industries. Yeah. So it's kind of not that. But what they're saying is that a union sort of industrial relations discussion can be triggered on an industry-wide basis, okay? And how that can be triggered is by the following. Either 10% of that workforce or industry can, or 1,000 employees. And you're like, oh, well, that seems a lot. But I will paint a picture for you. Let's look at the retail industry. First of all, what is retail? That's another discussion point. But you are thinking of people that could be Countdown, Warehouse, or Jane's Boutique in Timaru. What is being proposed is if 1,000 people go, hey, in the retail sector, we want better wages. And it's not, by the way, I think the key part also, it's not just wages, it's working conditions can play into this as well as a big part. So yeah, pay is predominant, no doubt, but working conditions could be hours, how often I'm working, certainty of those hours, the conditions of my work environment can be a big part of that, and health and safety or COVID, those sort of things can come into it now. But, if I'm dealing with the public, it could be the public are being idiots, and that's my working conditions. So there's lots in that can come into that. But if you think about it, if I'm Jane's Boutique in Timaru, who's probably more likely to be listening to this than the CEO of the warehouse, if you are listening to the warehouse, that'd be a really good kudos if you can rate us and give some feedback. You would be brought into that industry-wide legislation or industrial relations. That would then most likely be, there would be a body that would represent the industry, which most likely would be someone like Retail NZ, who's the industry body, master electricians for the electrician stuff. But in essence, why this suddenly can affect small business owners is your employees, whether they like it or not, to be honest, could be brought in to say, I'm Jane's Boutique, I've got 3 staff, happy as Larry, that work for me for years and awesome. Suddenly, 1,000 people get together, boom, and we're into it. The outcomes can affect what you do. Now, you might be fine with the outcomes, that's no problem. But on the flip side, you might not. And so you're going to get brought into this big umbrella of discussion. And so there's all these things if you don't, if there's not agreement between the union that represents those workers. Again, by the way, your employees might not even want to be part of this, but tough luck. Then there's a negotiation process, there's arbitration. So it's just, I guess, what business owners need to be aware of is unionization, I guess, that you may have not even ever come into contact with. Like certain industries, you get it and that's fine, that's cool, that's great. But others, construction's a good example. Hospo really, doesn't really happen, but it could. Might not, but it could. And then obviously out of that comes standardized potential pay rates, working conditions, which then would obviously be enforced from there.
Well, I think quite an interesting thing to probably look at is that I know the nurses have just had quite a big one, and then physiotherapists are up next. And they're obviously quite a lot of those are already unionised, particularly within the public health sector. Yeah. But watching what's going on there is probably quite an insight as to what is potentially going to come down the line. Because the truth is, if this goes through, it's going to be the random ones that get you. It's going to be, reps, recognised exercise professionals. Do you know what I mean? They'll come in. And I'm going to say something which I hope is not the truth, but I have a feeling it will be. It's the fact of there's going to be a lot of lawyers and a lot of those union type areas. Well, they're going to get paid a lot of money for doing this work, so they are going to try and rally the troops up. Yeah. And unfortunately, they're going to be the ones who get rich, whether it goes through or doesn't go through. Yeah.
I think we're probably lucky, Dave, that I don't imagine many trade unionists listen to our podcast. Well, we may get feedback.
It's one of
we
those
may
things,
go viral because of this. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a fine line, isn't it, between yes, it does need to happen, and maybe we're not aware of it because we're in an industry that's paid pretty well. However, I hope people do it for the right reasons. And that is the truth of it. A lot of these things are put in place to support people who do need support. I just hope that people don't take the piss. And I guess that goes back to exactly the last thing, doesn't it? If people need to be supported because they got made redundant, awesome. But if they're not actually actively looking for a job when they can walk outside and get one,
exactly. But that
do you know
cost
what I
is
mean?
and I think you're right.
That's
I
the
think
issue,
you're right.
isn't it?
I think you're right, Dave. I think that what I get frustrated with this that is there big business in some traditional industries or meat packing industry or whatever where working conditions are questionable. Are they keeping up to market rates? Yes. And do representation make sense? That completely makes sense. Like, I get that. I completely get that. I think what I struggle with here is we are in an environment where every conversation I have with a client, they are like, I need more staff. And they are paying their staff well. Like, it's in the Zero Business Insights. Wage growth or year on year for small business, August to August, grew 6%. And it's been growing every quarter for the last year and a bit. So it's not like small businesses are not trying to pay their staff more. They're trying to give more jobs or more employ more people than they ever have. And it's this essence that the employer is bad and so they must have some safeguards. Whereas a lot of employers that we deal with in our business, in the business community, we work with small business, they know their business is success is so much reliant on their staff that they look after them really, really well. I don't know what you're like, Dave, but the amount of people I've talked to recently about how does employee share schemes work, or how can I make sure I retain staff? Is it like they want to really keep hold of their good staff? They pay them well. They know they're critical. But I also think, you're talking about industrial relations of someone like the warehouse, and then they might clean it up a bit through this process versus Jane's Boutique. Well, cool. You're dealing with a public listed company that's got billions of dollars of profit versus Jane's Boutique, who small business, 50% of small business anytime are not cash flow positive. So I just think this broad brushstroke is, I think, it's dangerous for small business that we get put in the same category. And look, don't get me wrong. I think, the nurse is a great example where, no one would, my sister-in-law's a nurse and, they, for all the work, the stories she tells me, I'm like, whoa, you should be paid a lot of more money. And we all want that, we get that. But yeah, a lot of small businesses, like they try their best for their, and I'm not saying all cool people, like some of them are dicks and and cool, but that's why in a tight labour market they'll be found out because people go, sweet as, I'm off,
it's quite an interesting thing, isn't it? It's like, actually, to a certain degree, do you need to put something like a fair pay agreement in when the labour market's so short and people can walk out and get the pay that they need or want anyway? It's kind of like, it's a little bit of a thing, isn't it? However, I'll just jump in with my political two boots. Labour are going to do stuff like this whilst they've got the majority that they have.
Of course,
and I guess
why wouldn't you?
The question is, and this is where I get a little bit scared, is if they feel like they're not going to get in, which it's not looking like they potentially will, are they really going to double down and go for this? Or are they going to pull it in the hope that they save some voters coming back? I just can't see anything other than one of those two options.
It's one of two ways, isn't it, in some ways?
Yeah,
but
and if they double down and go for it,
yeah, I
hope they think
I doubt
through.
it, Dave, to be honest, because you got to remember, part of the voting mechanism for the Labour Party is a trade union, so they fund them, half them.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, I just it's we're seeing more and more kind of standardisation around these sort of things, and I just think it's really hard. Where, as you said, labour shortages. Companies who often are trying to do their very best for their employees do some great stuff in the sense of perks, add-ons, whatever, extra leave. I was speaking to a client Tuesday, going to give them extra leave around October because they've worked so hard, and so I'm going to give them extra leave, added holidays, so you just kind of go, well, business owners know what's best for their employees as well because they actually care about them as well.
Potentially all those small things will be taken out.
Well, all
the little things that happen that you appreciate. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You'll start to see random stuff get taken if things become too, will you lose flexibility within your working? The coffee machine and the coffee beans and everything else that they provide at work that isn't written in your contract, will that be removed because you got a $1 pay rise? Or
you got to
do you know what I mean?
You've got to pay for something else. Exactly.
It's kind of
it's
you
like
might
right
lose
way.
things that are important to you.
Yeah, like a right way we give family health insurance to our employees, and so it's something Graham, who's in our business, is real passionate about. But if other things get enforced, whether it's the added costs for national insurance scheme, well, suddenly our wage bill's gone up 1.3%. You know, like, so these other things might have to be looked at, which obviously are really important parts for why some, you know, employees often value this stuff. So I just think, yeah, it's, you know, what can we do about it? I don't really know. I don't think Jacinda listens to this podcast, or Grant or Michael would probably, but I do. Again, as you said, Dave, it's just being prepared about what's potentially coming. I do know one thing I would recommend is, and I know Retail NZ are doing it. Retail NZ are a client right away, so we deal with quite a lot of them. A lot of industry bodies are putting out specific information for their industry, and I've got, I know if you remember Retail NZ, they're doing a bunch of webinars to kind of talk through the process and how it works and all that sort of stuff. So if you need to get in contact with your industry body, and they'll talk you through what they're, because a lot of them have been in contact with government about lobbying either for or and talking through the issues about it, so they'll be really informed. So whether it's reading articles on their website or whatever, or information they put out, whether it's white papers or webinars and stuff. So really, yeah, encourage you to get in contact with the industry body and just find out what they're recommending. I'll put the link of a couple of articles I found. One was from Deloitte on the New Zealand Income Insurance Scheme, from the tax team on that.
Yeah.
Fair Payment Agreements is from PwC Legal. It's just simple, but it's kind of, it gives you kind of an overview of it and sort of the process that could potentially flow through. But yeah, just be prepared, and it's sort of, that's what's coming. Wonderful.
Don't bury your head.
What's the good news, Days? We've got to talk about good news. My advice is, look, we can all have a moan about this sort of stuff, but we can't control it. You know, let's focus on, as you said, Dave, whether it's your lending or whatever, or your plan of for your business. You can control that. You can control what you do today. You can control what you focus on. You know,
I think the only thing really to remember is, like, if any of these things do go through, it's on everybody. Yeah. So
Yeah.
you're not the only one. You're not being, like, victimized in that way. All small businesses will be feeling it. So that normally means that it will, you know, have swings and roundabouts. It will come back. Or, you know, this is kind of the one that I often see a lot, is good businesses will still be good businesses. They just
Correct.
find other ways to operate. They
Correct.
look for opportunity. They keep good staff. Do you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I think that doubles down. You know, at the end of the day, if you're a strong, sound business, then you're still going to be a strong, sound business.
Yeah,
It's just things that need to be aware of.
Yeah, it might
And
be
understanding the fact that, you know, you roll these costs will get rolled on at the end of the day. You're not going to
Yeah.
be expected to absorb them. Nobody is.
More inflation,
It just,
Dave,
it
is
just,
what you're saying.
well, yeah, effectively. let's rise that cost. Let's
the
rise
biggest
that
issue
cost
I
of
kind of
coffee
think is
again.
fuel it. Yeah. But you're right, Dave. I think, look, if you focus on
Gas on the fire.
strong margins, good profitability, good cash flow, you're in a much better position
Yeah.
to absorb that. So focus on that.
Definitely.
Yeah.
You know, just, and like, always say it to everyone is, like, just concentrate on where your opportunities are. Don't get bogged
Yeah.
down in the weeds. Keep your head up. Know your numbers. Look for opportunity. Look for smart, sensible opportunity. And they'll be out there, because for some people this will be the straw that breaks the camel's back. But guess what? That just means there's a bigger market share for you. But
Correct.
you need to be in the right position to take it.
Completely agree. All right, I think we'll sign off there, Dave.
Yeah.
As usual, everyone, I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you do, please do a review or a star or a thumbs up, depending on what platform you're listening to this on. Also, make sure you check out all our social media channels for any updates, whether it's on the podcast or other bits and bobs we release. And we'll catch you all next week.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you very much.